The dog didn't growl at her. That was the first thing Maren noticed. She had heard him the moment they came through the door. A low, rolling warning that vibrated somewhere between a sound and a feeling, the kind that made the front desk volunteers take one step back without even thinking about it. He was a Belgian Malinois, maybe 4 years old, with a working harness still buckled across his chest and mud dried along his left flank. His handler had him on a short lead and kept one hand pressed flat against the dog's shoulder, not to comfort him, Maren realized, but to control him. She noticed the handler too, of course. It was hard not to. He was tall with the kind of stillness that didn't come from being relaxed. It came from training. Sergeant First Class based on the patch on his jacket, though he changed into civilian clothes from the waist down. His name tape read, Garvey. He hadn't looked at anyone directly since he walked in, just swept the room once with the kind of eyes that cataloged exits and threats simultaneously, then fixed his gaze somewhere above the reception desk as if none of them were worth addressing. When Julie at the front desk reached for the intake clipboard, he said flatly, Don't put your hand toward him. He'll bite. Julie pulled her hand back. She smiled anyway, because that was Julie, but her smile had gone a little tight around the edges. Maren was coming out of exam room 2 with a chart tucked under her arm when she heard it. She paused in the hallway and watched through the narrow window in the door. The dog's name, according to the paperwork Garvey eventually slid across the counter, was Rex, which told her almost nothing and everything at the same time. Military working dogs named Rex were usually the ones who'd been through the most. She pushed through the hallway door and walked to the desk. I can take them to room 3, she said. Julie glanced at her with something between relief and apology. Garvey turned and looked at Maren for the first time. His expression didn't change exactly. It was more like he ran a fast, almost unconscious assessment and filed the result somewhere dismissive. You, the vet? Vet tech, Maren said. Dr. Solis will be with you in a few minutes. Something shifted in Garvey's jaw. Not quite a smirk. The word for it was closer to a decision that she wasn't worth adjusting his posture for. I'll wait for the vet, he said. Maren looked at him for one beat. Then she looked at Rex. Rex was looking at her. Not the way he'd been looking at Julie or the volunteer near the water cooler or the yellow lab in the waiting area who'd tried to sniff his direction and been corrected with a sharp sound from Garvey. Rex was looking at Maren with his head slightly tilted, ears half raised, his whole body just barely leaning forward. Room 3, Maren said again, not unkindly. Dr. Solis will meet you there. She didn't wait for him to agree. She just turned and walked toward the hallway, and after a moment, she heard the click of Rex's nails on the linoleum behind her. She didn't look back to see if Garvey was following. She already knew he was. The exam room was small and smelled like antiseptic and the faint ghost of every anxious animal that had come before. Maren set the chart on the counter and turned to find Rex already in the center of the room, sitting without being told to, watching her with those amber dark eyes that were too intelligent for comfort. Garvey stood near the door. He hadn't closed it all the way. What brought him in today? Maren asked, clicking her pen. Lameness, left rear. She wrote it down. How long? 4 days. Any swelling that you've noticed? Heat in the joint? A pause. Some. She nodded and crouched down, not approaching Rex yet, just bringing herself to his level, letting him read her the way he was already trying to. Some dogs, when you crouched, came to you. Some stayed put. Rex did neither. He just kept watching her with that specific quality of attention that she'd spent 5 years learning to read, the kind that said, I am deciding. What was his last deployment? She heard Garvey shift his weight behind her. That's not relevant to his leg. It is if the lameness is psychosomatic or stress-related, Maren said. Her voice was even. Sometimes the two aren't separate. Another pause. Longer. 14 months. He got back 8 weeks ago. She wrote that down too. He'd been eating normally? Sleeping? He doesn't sleep much. Garvey said it the way people said things they hadn't meant to say out loud. Too fast, then too quiet. Wakes up, paces. Maren looked up at Rex. Rex had moved incrementally 6 inches closer to where she was crouching. She hadn't seen him do it. She just noticed the distance was different than it had been. Has anyone worked with him since he came back? Behaviorally, I mean, reintegration? He's a working dog, Garvey said, and there was something sharp in it now. Something that might have been defensiveness or might have been exhaustion wearing defensiveness like a coat. He doesn't need a therapist. Maren didn't argue. She just made a small sound of acknowledgement and held out her hand, palm up, low. Not toward Rex, but simply open. An offer, not a demand. Rex looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He took 2 more steps forward and pressed his nose against her palm. Behind her, Garvey went very still. "Hey, buddy," Maren said quietly. She kept her voice low and steady, the register she used for animals that had learned to read threat into human sound. "You're okay. You're somewhere safe." Rex pushed his head up into her hand. Not aggressively, not even urgently. It was slower than that. Like something in him was testing the temperature of the water before deciding to wade in. She heard Garvey make a sound she couldn't fully interpret. "He doesn't do that," he said. "He just did. I'm telling you, he hasn't let anyone touch him since." He stopped. Maren ran her hand gently along Rex's neck, feeling for tension, for the way he held himself. He was tight through the shoulders, looser than she would have expected everywhere else. She moved slowly toward his left hip, and he turned his head to watch her hand, but didn't pull away. "Since what?" she asked. The question sat in the room for a moment. "His handler," Garvey said finally. "His actual handler, corporal named Finch. Rex was with him when it happened. Over there. Finch didn't make it back." Maren's hand went still for just a second. Then she kept moving, gently, along Rex's flank. "Rex was with the body for close to 6 hours before extraction," Garvey said. He was looking at the wall now, not at her, not at Rex. By the time they got to them, he wouldn't let anyone near. Took 3 people They had to sedate him to get him out. Maren felt Rex lean, very slightly against her shoulder. "He's been assigned to me since we got back," Garvey continued. "But we don't have the same bond. He tolerates me. That's about as far as it goes." Maren looked at Rex. Rex looked back at her with an expression that was not a human expression, but communicated, nonetheless, something very human. The particular loneliness of a creature waiting to be understood. "Why does he trust you?" Garvey asked. It came out rougher than he probably intended. "He just met you." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know that he trusts me yet," Maren said. "I think he's just not afraid of me. Those are different things." She stood slowly, keeping one hand on Rex's back. He stayed pressed against her leg. "Can you tell me what you know about his training? Who handled him before Finch?" Garvey told her. She listened. She wrote down the details that mattered and left out the ones that didn't. And while he talked, something in his posture changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that a person changes when they have been holding something alone for a long time and someone is, unexpectedly, actually listening. Dr. Solis came in 10 minutes later, took one look at Rex standing calmly beside Maren with his chin resting against her hip, and raised both eyebrows. "I see you 2 have been getting acquainted," he said. "He's been very cooperative," Maren said. Garvey said nothing, but when Dr. Solis reached for Rex's left leg, Rex turned his head toward Maren first. Not away, toward, like checking that she was still there. She was. The diagnosis was a minor soft tissue injury, the kind that healed fine with rest and anti-inflammatories and didn't require anything dramatic. Maren filled out the discharge instructions while Dr. Solis spoke with Garvey, and she was aware, peripherally, of Garvey asking questions that were technically about Rex's leg, but were actually about something else. Whether dogs could have anxiety. Whether a dog could grieve. Whether what happened overseas could still be happening in some form in a safe room in Virginia every night when Rex woke up and paced the floor. Dr. Solis answered carefully, the way good vets did. She finished the paperwork and walked back to the exam room to find Rex sitting in the doorway, blocking it, with his body in a way that might have looked aggressive but wasn't. He was just watching the hallway, making sure he knew where she was. She crouched down again. "You're going to be okay," she told him. "It takes time. That's all it is." Rex turned and licked the side of her face with a single, deliberate swipe that was nothing like the frantic, people-pleasing licks she usually got. It was more like punctuation, like an acknowledgement. She laughed, surprised, and put her forehead against his for a second. When she stood up and turned around, Garvey was in the doorway. He was looking at her differently than he had been 2 hours ago. The assessment was still there. That was probably permanent, the way some things became permanent, but the conclusion he'd filed away earlier had been replaced with something less certain, something that looked around the edges like it might eventually become respect. "I owe you an apology," he said. Maren blinked. "When we came in," he said, "I didn't." He stopped, tried again. "I've had a hard time letting people get close to him after what happened." It felt like another stop. It felt like the least I could do for Finch was protect Rex the way Finch would have. "That makes sense," Maren said. "But I've been protecting him from the wrong things." He looked at Rex. "I think. I don't know. I'm still figuring that part out." Rex had moved to sit beside Garvey now, pressed against his left leg. Garvey put his hand on the dog's head in a way that was less like a handler and more like a person who didn't know what else to do with the feeling he was currently having. "He's going to need consistency," Maren said. "Routine, the same people, same spaces for a while. His nervous system needs to learn that nothing is going to change without warning." "Okay. And he might benefit from working with someone who specializes in working dogs post-deployment. There are programs." "I know about the programs," Garvey said. He exhaled, "I've been meaning to look into them. I can send you some contacts if you want, places we've referred people to before." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I'd appreciate that." She nodded and started writing the contacts down on the back of the discharge sheet. The room was quiet. Rex had lain down across both their feet, hers and Garvey's, with the calm authority of a dog who had decided something. "How long have you been doing this?" Garvey asked. "Vet tech work? About 5 years." "You're good at it." "Thank you." "I don't mean the medical part," he said. "I mean the other part." She looked up. "Knowing what they need," he said, "when they can't tell you." She thought about that for a second. "I had a dog when I was growing up," she said. "A rescue. She'd been through a lot before she got to us. She didn't trust people for a long time." She looked at Rex. "You learn to read the ones who've been through things. They communicate differently. But they're not silent. You just have to slow down enough to hear it." Garvey was quiet. "Finch was the same way," he said after a moment. "Not a talker, but you always knew exactly what he meant." He paused. "Rex probably recognized something in you. The way you move around him. You're not asking him to perform. You're just letting him be." Maren looked at Rex, who was lying completely flat now, one paw extended, the tension she'd felt in his shoulders an hour ago entirely gone. "That's what they need most, usually," she said. "Just someone who isn't asking them to be anything other than what they are." They were at the front desk when it happened. A man came through the door with a German shepherd on a choke chain, pulling hard. And the sudden noise of the door and the other dog sent Rex surging up from his sit with a sound that made 3 people in the waiting room flinch. Garvey had the lead taut in half a second, authoritative and practiced, and Rex responded. He stopped. He sat. He looked at Garvey. But he was trembling. Finally, all over. Maren moved without thinking. She came around the desk and crouched in front of Rex, between him and the door, blocking his sight line to the German shepherd. She didn't touch him immediately. She just put herself there, in his field of vision, a familiar point in a room that had suddenly become loud. Rex looked at her. His trembling slowed. She held out her hand, palm up, the same way she had 2 hours ago, and he pressed his nose into it. "Good boy," she said quietly. "You're okay. That was a lot. You handled it." The room had gone a little quiet. She was aware of it, the way people sometimes went still watching something they hadn't expected to see. The German shepherd's owner looked vaguely embarrassed. Julie at the desk had stopped typing. Garvey was looking at Maren. She stood up and moved back to her side of the desk. Rex watched her the whole way. When she stopped, he settled, not all the way, not completely, but enough. He kept his eyes on her like she was the fixed point he was navigating by. "Has he been like this since he got back?" Maren asked Garvey quietly, pulling up his discharge paperwork on the screen. "Yes," Garvey said. The word was simple and heavy. "Every day." "That's not a character flaw," Maren said. "That's not weakness, that's an injury. His brain learned to respond to the world a certain way because that response kept him alive. Now the world is different, and his brain hasn't caught up yet." She said it to Garvey, but she felt Garvey hear it in a way that was slightly larger than the words. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice had gone carefully flat in the way that meant the opposite. "Is that something that gets better?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "With time. With the right support. With patience." She looked at Rex. "And with people willing to stay when it's hard." Garvey put his hand on Rex's head again. Rex leaned into it this time. Actually leaned. Weight shifted, trusting. A small thing. An enormous thing. Outside, in the parking lot, the afternoon light was doing what late spring light does in Virginia. Going gold and long-shadowed, making everything look slightly more significant than it probably was. Garvey stopped at his truck and loaded Rex into the back with the practiced ease of years. Rex turned around once in the cab and looked through the rear window, and Maren, standing by the clinic door because she'd stepped out to check the sign-out board, raised her hand. Rex put his paw on the glass. She heard Garvey laugh. It was small and short and surprised, like something that hadn't happened in a while and had forgotten how. He turned and looked at her across the parking lot. "Thank you," he said. "For today. For..." He seemed to run out of specific words for all of it. "Come back in 2 weeks," she said, "for his follow-up. We'll check the leg. We'll be here." She went back inside. The afternoon continued. There were 3 more appointments and an emergency walk-in and the usual chaos of a small animal clinic on a Thursday. But she thought about Rex for the rest of the day. About the way he'd pressed his forehead to hers. About the 6 hours he'd spent in a field in a country most people couldn't point to on a map, waiting beside someone he loved who wasn't coming back. About the way he looked at her when she crouched down, not with hope exactly, because that requires a kind of safety he hadn't had yet, just with the careful, questioning attention of someone who had learned the world was dangerous but was trying, slowly, to learn something different. She thought about what Garvey had said. "You're not asking him to perform." She thought about her own dog, the rescue, the one who'd taken a whole winter to learn that hands could be safe. She understood something about Rex that she couldn't have explained in the discharge paperwork. It wasn't professional knowledge. It wasn't technique. It was the specific recognition that comes from having been yourself, the kind of creature that survived by staying braced, and from having eventually, improbably, learned to put that bracing down. Not because the world became safe, because someone let you practice. 2 weeks later, Garvey came back. Rex saw her through the window before they came through the door. By the time Maren got to the waiting room, Rex was already sitting in front of it, waiting. I keep thinking about the moment Rex pressed his nose into Maren's palm. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't, really. It was quiet. It was small. It was a dog deciding in his own time that one person in a room full of people was worth the risk of trusting. That's the thing nobody tells you about earning trust. It doesn't happen because you demand it. It doesn't happen because you outrank someone, or because you're louder, or because you've decided in advance that you deserve it. Garvey walked into that clinic certain he knew exactly how the next hour would go. He'd drawn his conclusions before Maren said a single word. She was too young, too soft, not the vet, not worth adjusting for. And Rex, who had survived things most people will never see, who had spent 6 hours in a field waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Rex walked right past all of that certainty and made his own call. That's not luck. That's cause and effect, plain and simple. Maren had spent years learning to slow down, to not ask animals to perform, to let them come to her on their own terms. That's not a talent you're born with. That's a choice you make over and over in small moments that don't feel significant until suddenly they are. She built something in herself, a kind of steadiness, a quality of attention, and Rex recognized it the way animals always recognize the real thing. You can't fake that. You can't shortcut it. What she'd put in, she got back. And Garvey. I think about him too. Because it would have been easy to stay in that doorway the whole time, arms crossed, waiting for the moment he could say, "I told you so." A lot of people would have done exactly that. Instead, somewhere in the middle of that exam room, he let himself be wrong. He let himself hear something he hadn't been willing to hear before. That what Rex was carrying wasn't a discipline problem. It was a wound. That protecting someone from everything isn't the same as helping them heal. That took a kind of courage that has nothing to do with combat. What I take from this story is something I keep learning the hard way. Integrity shows up in the details. It's in whether you stay patient when it's inconvenient. It's in whether you're willing to look at a situation with fresh eyes instead of the ones you walked in with. Maren didn't help Rex because she was smarter than Garvey. She helped him because she was honest. Honest about what he needed, honest about what she didn't know, honest enough to just be present without an agenda. And Rex just did what creatures do when someone finally stops asking them to be something they're not. He leaned in. He chose her. Not because she was impressive, because she was safe. I think most of us are waiting for exactly that. Not for someone to fix us, just for someone who'll let us figure it out at our own pace and stay anyway.